Even though it says that everybody regarded Ahithophel's words as, the gospel truth, as God's word, it was not. This advice that he gave to uh, Absalom to sleep with all of these women was not godly advice. This is not something that God would have condoned, because God said in the same chapter that he said that you're not supposed to sleep with your half sister, and that's what, started all of this mess with Amnon. He also said that a man is not supposed to sleep with the same woman as his dad. And so Absalom was doing that. And so God would have never told him to do that. But this was a fitting a punishment for David. Remember, God told David through Nathan that his son would raise up the sword from his own family, and that other people would sleep with his wives because he had slept with Uriah's wife. And so I'm going to read you that. This was David's punishment given to him for sleeping with Uriah's wife Bathsheba. This is 2 Samuel 12, beginning in verse 9, and it says, "Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and you've taken his wife to be your wife, and you've killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you've despised me, and you've taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. And so, I, the Lord, will raise up adversity against you from your own house." So that's what's happened with Absalom. "And I'll take your wives before your eyes, and I'll give them to your neighbor, and he will lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all of Israel, before the sun." And so that raises a couple of questions for us, right? Because was that just a prophecy by God saying that that's what's going to happen to David? Or did he cause this to happen as his punishment? This does seem to be David's punishment, right? From God. He says, I'm going to cause these things to happen. But how does God cause these things to happen? That would be the question. And so if God didn't give these words to Ahithophel because that would be a sin, then how is it that he used this to be a punishment to David, right? What happened is that this was a prophecy to David on what would happen when God withdrew his hand of protection from him, when God chose not to intervene. Because these things, the son wanting to kill the dad when there's a dynasty so that he can get the kingdom, we all have heard, stories from back whenever there were dynasties, that the dad would worry that the son would try to kill him so he could take the throne early. It's like, dad's past his time, I want to get the throne. And so he would be paranoid about that, or that it would actually happen. So that's a natural thing that happened. Also, a natural thing is for whoever takes the throne to sleep with the women to prove that they have actually taken the throne. And so what God did is he withdrew his hand of protection and decided not to intervene when Absalom did the exact thing that normally happens, where a son would rise up against his father, thinking he would be a better king than his father, and rushing the rise to the throne, and also the sleeping with the concubines. Now, did God orchestrate that he slept with them on the roof, the exact same roof, most likely, that David was first tempted with Bathsheba on? Right? That makes sense. That makes sense that God would have orchestrated that. And he said, I'm going to make sure that everybody knows it, that it's not a secret, so that it's on that same roof and that it's not a secret. Yeah, that's orchestrated by God. But God wasn't going to tell Absalom to lie, to sin. God doesn't, the Bible tells us that God isn't tempted by sin, and he doesn't tempt us to sin. I'm gonna read you James. We've talked about it before, but I'm gonna read you James 1, because this is when God tells the people that he does not cause people to sin. This is James 1, beginning in verse 13. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. And so that clearly says God does not tempt anyone to sin. He cannot do evil, and he won't tempt you to do evil. And so he did not orchestrate that. God did not tell Absalom, you need to sin so I can punish your dad, in the same way that he took Uriah's wife. I want you to take his wives. He didn't do that. But he did withdraw his hand of protection from David as a punishment, knowing that these are the things that a son would be tempted to do, to take the throne from the father, and he was going to allow that to happen, allow him to rise up against his father, and then he also was going to allow him to take his wives. Maybe he did, like I say, allow him to do it on the roof and where everybody could see it, because that's just such a weird thing, but that is all. But God didn't withdraw his hand of protection from David completely, right? Only selectively, only so that he could suffer specific punishments that were, fitting for the crime that David had committed. But the rest of the time, God was still with David, and he was still protecting David, right? Because he gave him Hushai to give him the right counsel. He made Ahithophel's counsel foolishness, just as David asked him to. He allowed him time to get word to the two priests, and then protected the two sons while they got word to David. He let him get over into the other side of the Jordan River safely. He let him make it all the way up to the capital. He let David still have his core skilled warriors with him. Joab and Abiathar both stuck with him the whole time. All the Gittites and the leader of the Gittites, all of those people stuck with David. They're all skilled fighters. He also allowed those people, the three important men, to come to him, which were important men to come and serve him, because the brother of the Ammonite king, like I said, it would have been a perfect time for them to revolt, yet God gave him favor towards David instead. He also gave the wealthy Gilead, the guy that lived in Gilead, he gave him favor on him, which would be important because he's now standing in the land of Gilead. So for him to give him favor towards him, that was all important. He also got David out of the kingdom, the town of Jerusalem, so that none of the infrastructure in Jerusalem got destroyed in the battle, and instead made it be in the forest, so that nobody, no infrastructure was destroyed, and that the forest was killing most of the people. And then he also turned Absalom's plan around on himself, made Absalom die, and also in a fitting way, right? In the way that, his hair was his glory, and then that actually was the way that he died. And so God was protecting David all the while, orchestrating all of those things. So in some ways, he was withdrawing his protection from David to make his plan work out. And in some ways, he was intervening on David's behalf to make his plan work out.